Okay, today I'm going to talk about an essay by William Golding, Thinking as a Hobby. It's a great essay for critical thinking, and it's a beautiful essay. I mean, if you like reading essays, it's a beautiful essay. It's one of my favorite essays. In this essay, Golding will describe three grades of thinking. Grade 3, which is the lowest, grade 2, grade 1. And that's what I want to basically, in this 15-minute video, go over what those three grades of thinking are, and then relate them to three as when you write a critical, an essay on some debatable subject. Basically, I'm going to argue that you go through three stages that correspond to the three grades of thinking. Let me begin with the beginning of the essay so we'll be on the same page. This is how he begins his essay. While I was still a boy, I came to the conclusion that there were three grades of thinking. And since I was later to claim thinking as my hobby, I came to an even stranger conclusion, namely that I myself could not think at all. I must have been an unsatisfactory child for grown-ups to deal with. I remember how incomprehensible they appeared to me at first, but not, of course, how I appeared to them. It was the headmaster of my grammar school who first brought the subject of thinking before me, though neither in the way nor with the result he intended. He had some statuettes in his study. They stood on a high cupboard behind his desk. One was a lady wearing nothing but a bath towel. She seemed frozen in panic, in an eternal panic, lest the bath towel slip down any farther. And since she had no arms, she was in an unfortunate position to pull the towel up again. Next to her crouched the statuette of a leopard, ready to spring down at the top drawer of a filing cabinet, labeled A to AH. My innocence interpreted this as the victim's last despairing cry. Beyond the leopard was a naked, muscular gentleman who sat looking down with his chin on his fist and his elbow on his knee. He seemed utterly miserable. Sometime later, I learned about these statuettes. The headmaster had placed them where they would face delinquent children, because they symbolized to him the whole of life. The naked lady was the Venus of Milo. She was love. She was not worried about the towel. She was just busy being beautiful. The leopard was nature, and he was being natural. The naked, muscular gentleman was not miserable. He was Rodin's thinker, an image of pure thought. It is easy to buy small plaster models of what you think life is like. Okay, so that's the beginning. And these three statuettes are going to be very important in the essay because he's going to arrange them twice more. And so there's going to be three arrangements of the three statuettes, and there are three grades of thinking. So there's a lot of threes in this essay: three grades of thinking, three statuettes, and three arrangements of the statuettes. So, and when if you think about the essay, you could try to figure out what's going on there. Make some correlations between the statuettes, if the statuettes represent the grades of thinking. There's different ways to interpret this. So that's an interesting thing to do if you're going to write an essay on this essay. Okay, so anyway, as a child, he would often get in trouble. He'd get called into the headmaster's office. And he'd get in trouble all the time, and so clearly there was something. He felt there was something missing. Nature had not endowed the rest of the human race with a sixth sense, because he was constantly being told he couldn't think by the headmaster. So he thought he couldn't think. He was lacking some sixth sense. This must be so, I mused on my way back to the class, since whether I had broken a window or failed to remember Boyle's law or been late for school, my teachers produced me one adult answer. Why can't you think? As I saw the case, I had broken the window because I had tried to hit Jack Arney with a cricket ball and missed. I could not remember Boyle's law because I had never bothered to learn it. And I was late for school because I preferred looking over the bridge into the river. That reference to looking over the bridge in a river is very interesting because it's a framing device. Framing device. This essay has several framing devices. At the beginning of the framing device is when something is, say, A is introduced at the beginning of the essay, and then at the end of the essay, it frames it. So at the beginning of the essay, he introduces this idea. He's looking over the bridge at the river, and at the end of the essay, he's doing the same thing. He's at Oxford. He's looking over the bridge into the river, and he encounters Einstein on that bridge. So bridge. And also at the beginning of the essay is this theme of he's impossibility of communication. He doesn't understand the professors, his teachers. They don't understand him. He can't communicate with them. At the end of the essay, when he encounters Einstein, he also cannot communicate with Einstein because they don't speak the same language. Einstein speaks German. He speaks English. He says, I would have loved to have, one word, several words of German so I could talk to Einstein. So the lack of communication. Another thing that is a framing device, at the beginning of the essay, he talks about how when he started learning how to think critical thinking critically, he would lose the girl that he loved was what supposedly, quote, love. When he was 14 years old, he loved this girl called Ruth. But he got in too many debates with her about religion and so on. So that broke up. So he says, when you start thinking critically, it could be dangerous because you're going to lose people that you love or care about. At the end of the essay, he also loses a lot of friends because of his devotion to critical thinking. Anyway, so now I want to go over what the three grades are. The lowest grade is grade 3, and basically it's not thinking at all. He calls it feeling. Grade 3 is feeling. It's not thinking. He says grade 3 is. He says what it is, it's feeling. He says 9/10 of the human race are grade 3 thinkers. So he has a very pessimistic view of the human race. He learned all about this from his teachers. For example, he learned, and it's grade 3. Here's how he summarizes it. I have dealt at length. He learned about grade 3 thinking by observing his teachers and about how they were inconsistent. They said one thing, did the other. I have dealt at length with my teachers because this was my introduction to the nature of what is commonly called thought. Through them, I discovered that thought is often full of unconscious prejudices, ignorance, and hypocrisy. That's grade 3 thinking. It's thought that is full of unconscious prejudice, ignorance, hypocrisy. It will lecture on disinterested purity while its neck is being remorselessly twisted toward its skirt. That's referring to his teacher, Mr. Houghton, who was constantly talking about a life of duty, and how did he put it? He would give long monologues about the good life, sexless and full of duty. And when a pretty girl would walk by the classroom, his neck would turn towards the pretty girl. I have dealt at length, he says, with my teachers because this was my introduction to the nature of what is commonly called thought. Through them I discovered that thought is often full of unconscious prejudice, ignorance, and hypocrisy. It will lecture on disinterested purity while its neck is being remorselessly twisted toward its skirt. Technically, it is about as proficient as most businessmen's golf, as honest as most politicians' intentions, or, to come near to my own preoccupation, as coherent as most books that get written. It is what I came to call grade 3 thinking, though more properly, it is feeling rather than thought. That's grade 3 thinking. At this level, at this point, he's like 13, 14, 15 years old at this point. He encounters a pious lady who hated the Germans. But he confronted her with the proposition, that you should love your enemies, right? Hypocrisy. She hates the Germans, but she also says, that you should love your enemies. And she wasn't too happy when he pointed out the contradiction. So his response to that, was that we need to respect grade 3 thinkers because, he says, because of her, I no longer dismiss lightly a mental process, which for 9/10 of the population is the nearest they will ever get to thinking. They have immense solidarity. We had better respect them, for we are outnumbered and surrounded. A crowd of grade 3 thinkers, all shouting the same thing, all warming their hands at the fire of their own prejudices, will not thank you for pointing out the contradictions in their beliefs. Okay, That's great. He says grade 2 is when you move beyond grade 3, and it's when you start thinking for yourself, examining issues, pro and con, and trying to work through the issues critically, assess things objectively. That's grade 2 thinking. He says he became a grade 2 thinker when he pointed out to the pious lady, who hated the Germans. He said, you should also love your enemies. So grade 2 thinking, the problem with grade 2 thinking, he says it's kind of fun because it's kind of fun pointing out people's hypocrisies and prejudices and so on. It's kind of fun, he says, observing how people who hunt foxes, justify their actions by saying foxes love to be torn to pieces. So it's kind of fun, but the thing about grade 2 thinking is that it takes you. You want to get to the top of the mountain, meaning when you have a problem, you want to solve it. But grade 2 thinking just gets you halfway up the mountain. The typical grade 2 thinker is Pontius Pilate. He says Pontius Pilate. The typical grade 3 thinkers were his teachers. The typical grade 2 thinker is Pontius Pilate, and he says Pontius Pilate because when Jesus stood before Pilate in the Gospels, he asked Jesus, what is truth? And what is truth? And Golding says that's what the typical grade 2 thinker asks, but he doesn't ask it, or she doesn't ask it at the beginning of the quest for understanding, but at the end. A grade 1 thinker will ask the question, what is truth, and then go find it. The grade 2 thinker will ask the question, what is truth, at the end of the investigation and just give up. The highest is grade 1 thinking, and this is when you actually solve your problem and you come up with a systematic answer. And he says that the best example of a grade 1 thinker is Einstein, who worked through the puzzles of physics and ultimately came up with a systematic answer. One of his answers being E equals mc squared. He had to convince people that was true, and he did so through writing a scientific paper. But he had to systematically think through the issues to convince other people. Okay, so basically these are the three grades of thinking in this essay. Thinking as a hobby. I mean, you could spend a couple hours talking about this essay, so I'm going very fast. I just want to focus on the 3 grades of thinking. Grade 3 is 9/10 of the human race, he says, are at this level. Basically, it's not thinking at all. It's just reacting with your gut feeling. Grade 2 is when you actually start examining the issue and considering opposing viewpoints. Grade 1 is when you work through the issues and come up with an answer. What I want to do now is to make a connection between the 3 grades of thinking, and then what happens when you write an essay on some debatable issue. And you do this for most classes. One of your assignments usually in classes is to examine some issue and come up with your own view. Read some opposing viewpoints and come up with your own view. So basically, here's what happens when you write an essay. Let's say you write an essay on the death penalty. Are you for or against it? First of all, you're at grade. When you're given a new subject to write about, everyone starts there. Maybe you never examine the issue clearly. So this is where you have an immediate reaction to it. Are you for or against the death penalty? You have a gut feeling. Okay, I'm for it, I'm against it, whatever. But basically, you can't write an essay at this point because basically you don't know what the issues are. Grade 2 is, but you're certain. You're certain that you're right. I'm against it. And I'm for it. You're happy. When you go to grade 2, you start reading opposing viewpoints. You start reading ideas that go against what you believe. So now this is kind of disturbing because now you're not too happy anymore. Now you don't know what to think. Basically you're chaos, complete confusion. At this stage, basically you're reading essays for and against. At this stage now you're at a state of confusion. You cannot write your essay at this stage yet because you don't know what to say. You don't have a viewpoint. You're basically saying, I don't know. I mean, this person says this or says that. Once you work through, you read the essays, you think about it, you work through it, then you come up with your own view. That's grade 1. At this point, you then write your essay. You may believe the same thing you believed at grade 3, or you may believe different. The difference is this. At grade 1, you now are able to give a reasoned response because you have examined the issues, pro and con. So the 3 grades of thinking, 3, 2, and 1, are basically what happens when you go through the stages of writing a critical essay. Okay?